So a few months ago when I was at the cinema, I was going up the escalators to the screen that I was in, and on my way up I was looking at the posters that they had for upcoming films, and the one that caught my eye was this one. It was for a film called Fighting With My Family. Now at the time I had no idea what this film was about, and just looking at the poster I thought it was just a cliche comedy involving a rebellious family member, in this case a girl, and their crazy family, and it's going to be all hijinks and slapstick and just the usual Hollywood shit that they seem to make every now and again, or every other year it seems like. I later saw a trailer before the film I was going to see that showed that this film was actually a biopic, which makes no difference I guess, because the thing that actually caught my eye about this poster was none of that. It was actually the fact that The Rock was on it, and more specifically that The Rock was wearing a plain white t-shirt and blue jeans. Now this was something that I never really thought about up to this point, but it hit me like a bolt of lightning from the blue. That The Rock nearly always plays the same sort of character in his films, and that he always seems to be wearing this exact costume, if you can call it that. So after the film I went home, I had a quick look online for other posters from The Rock's filmography, and even just a quick glance proved me right. So let's have a look at some of these. So the first poster is for a film called Faster. I've never seen this film, but judging by the picture and the font that they've used, I can imagine that it's about as generic as it gets. Also, The Rock just made you lose the game. So as you can see, it's a slight variation on what I was saying that he was wearing, because here he's actually wearing a grey t-shirt, but other than that, it's exactly the same. He's got jeans on, he's got a skin-tight t-shirt, it's the same thing basically. So the next poster is for a film called Snitch, which I think is in competition with Faster as to which can be the most generic poster of all time, because just look at them, just terrible. And you're looking at these two posters and you're thinking, well, this is just the same film, isn't it? It's got The Rock in it, he's wearing the same sort of clothing, it's really grey in terms of the lighting and the background. He's got the same stubby goatee, which to be fair he has in about half his films. It just looks exactly the same, and you would be forgiven for thinking that these posters are for the same film because they're so similar and generic. You could probably just swap them around and tell people that it was actually from the other film. Nobody's seen these films, I imagine, as well. They're not very well known, so I doubt anyone would actually tell the difference. And speaking of swapping stuff around and thinking that nobody will notice, the director of Snitch actually made a film a few years later called Shot Caller, and the poster for that film, well, yeah, it's the exact same image of The Rock, but instead they've poorly photoshopped Nikolai Coster-Waldau's face and his arm over it. If you look at where his sleeve actually ends and where his arm starts, it's particularly bad. They didn't even bother to change his clothes to a different colour. You can even see the veins in his hands are in the exact same spot and even have the same prominence to them. Like, they didn't bother to make him look less muscular because Nikolai Coster-Waldau is nowhere near as big as The Rock. And just to add to the hilarity, in every version of this poster using this image, they've spelt his surname wrong. They put Costner instead of Costa, which is just... it just shows the incompetence of the entire thing. And going with the grey t-shirt theme, let's have a look at our next poster, which is for Walking Tall. This is one of the earlier films in The Rock's acting career, and apparently it must have been the first film that the person that made the poster has ever worked on, because, I mean, just look at it. Can you believe that somebody actually got paid to make this, and then multiple people probably got paid to approve this? It might actually be the most basic film poster of all time. There is nothing in the background, and The Rock is just walking towards you with a wooden plank. It doesn't tell you anything about the film whatsoever. Now this film is apparently a remake of a film from 1973 or something like that, which I'm not even sure if that's true, but that's apparently what the internet's saying. I haven't seen that film. I think I've seen this film, but what I'm trying to say is that films from like the 70s and the 80s used a lot of basic movie posters. There were a lot of white and just like an image of a person or something from the film. So you could think they were going for that, but a lot of those movie posters are quite interesting, or you can understand why they're quite basic. They probably didn't have huge budgets, probably didn't have anyone to actually make a movie poster. But in 2004, a film with The Rock in it and with a major studio backing it should be able to make something better than this. And for me, the other thing is that when I see a film poster that has a white background, red and black text, and just one of the actors just shoved into it and nothing else, I immediately think of romantic comedies or just like these cheesy comedies in general that have no real substance to them. And I'm not trying to say that those genres are bad, but usually they shove their actors to the forefront and don't bother putting any effort into the posters because they know that these films don't have anything to them except for the fact that they have X actor, Y actor. That's all these films are sold on, and that's what I see when I look at this. This film isn't a comedy film, it's not a rom-com, so it's weird, but all I see is, and I guess it kind of fits for the time because this is when The Rock was starting his acting career, it's just that this film has The Rock in it. That's all you need to know about this film, and after seeing it, I think I've seen this film. There was a few films he did around the time that kind of might be the same film, I don't know. I think a few of them had different titles in different countries and stuff like that. It's a film with The Rock in it, that's all you need to know. Apparently Gerard Butler is in a lot of these types of films as well, which I had no idea, but when I was looking for photos of movie posters, for examples, he was in like 10 of them, so that's weird. What's also weird is that when I saw The Rock wearing this and walking around with a plank of wood, I immediately thought of Johnny 2x4, and what's funny is that Johnny 2x4 is a bald guy wearing a white t-shirt and denim jeans, which is basically the theme and possibly the selling point of our next three films. I've decided to group these ones together because they have a lot of similarities in the actual genre of the films and what the films are about in general, but also the fact that The Rock just looks like he's basically jumping from one poster into the next because he looks that similar in them. So, spinning our Wheel of Fortune, I will go with Skyscraper. So again, he's got a white shirt on. It's not a t-shirt, but it is rolled up at the sleeves like he does in any other film where he wears a button-up shirt. This could actually be a cool poster if it didn't look so fake, and also if The Rock wasn't pushed all the way up into the image. Like if he was pulled back a bit and if the camera was pulled back a bit, you could see the size of the building and how far he has to fall. It could be quite cool, but again, they just want to push the actors right up into the frame so far where you don't know what else is going on, what the film's about, other than just this actor is in it. The other poster is slightly better, but this was also the poster that was ridiculed before the film comes out because everything in it just looks ridiculous. All the buildings look fake. The jump that he's making, I think people were working out that he basically is going to fall to his death, so it's a slightly better poster, but that's not really saying anything. And just as a quick aside, what is it with movie posters making their actors look so fake in them? If I use an example that fits with this video, we'll look at one of The Rock's films, which is Journey 2, which is also convenient because again, look at what he's wearing. But the main thing is just look at his face and arms. They look like they're computer generated, but they also look like they're just poorly photoshopped. It kind of looks like they've got the blur and smudge tools on Photoshop and just went to town on it to the point where they couldn't undo it and they just thought, yeah, we'll roll with that. The girl and the boy in the image actually look like they've been cropped out from an actual frame in the film, so they look slightly better, but they still look like they've been edited to oblivion to give them this really fake, smooth look. I can't understand why. It's bizarre, it's creepy, it does nothing, and The Rock's Humpty Dumpty head is going to haunt my nightmares for the rest of eternity. Anyway, getting back to the original point, the next movie is San Andreas, and the posters I actually saw in person all look like this, where it doesn't actually show The Rock wearing his classic white t-shirt and jeans look, but it does have the same issue of let's just shove his face into most of the poster because people don't go see films for story or the directors or anything like that. They just want to go see that person be in a film for 2 hours doing whatever. There's a few decent variations on the San Andreas poster which I actually think are quite good. They show more what the film's about. You get kind of more of the disaster theme to it, which is a lot better than just having The Rock's face and that's about it. But the funniest ones are these two, which I'm not even sure if they're actually official posters, but I'm just going to go with it anyway because they're just too funny not to look at. There's this one where it looks like The Rock is about half the size of a skyscraper and he's the one making all the buildings fall down with just a stare. And then there's this one which is just, I mean, just look at it. It's awful in every way. I couldn't even find a version of this image that didn't have stock photo watermarks on it, which is kind of fitting because it's such a generic photo and poster and layout and everything that it could only have been generated by a stock image website. And apparently this image is from the San Andreas marketing, but when you look at it, it actually looks more like it's from the film Rampage, which is the third film that I was going to look at starring The Rock, which features him wearing, you guessed it, white t-shirt and jeans and standing in front of a city that's been destroyed, this time by big animals rather than a natural disaster. Apparently, according to Google, you can buy these films together in a pack, which I imagine would be quite interesting watching them back to back, because you would have Rampage, where you'd be watching The Rock destroy a city with giant monsters, and then you could watch San Andreas and pretend it's the same city, and The Rock is a different version of The Rock, and he's saving everyone from The Rock in Rampage. I don't know, I think I'm just losing my mind at this point. But anyway, when I searched for Rampage, I never actually found that exact stock photo with the helicopter in it. But when I searched for San Andreas, I found that image multiple times. So I can only assume that that image is actually from the San Andreas marketing, which is just incredible because it's literally the exact same stuff that you've seen in the Rampage marketing as well. And it just goes to further prove my point on how generic and similar The Rock's films are and his marketing is. In fact, if you took the posters from San Andreas, Rampage and Skyscraper, they all look like they're from different acts of the same film. You could have The Rock coming to a city that's been destroyed on a helicopter, and then as the city's been destroyed, he's trying to escape through buildings, he's hopping through them, he's holding onto them because they're collapsing, and then it's finally got him at the end, standing over the destruction with this giant ape that caused all of it. I mean, maybe I'm stretching at this point, but if you actually took away all of the text on it and just showed people the images from Skyscraper and from Rampage and from San Andreas, didn't tell them it was a poster and just said that's like 3 different frames from the same movie, I bet a lot of people would probably think, yeah, that actually adds up, that makes sense. Now, there were a few more posters that I was originally going to talk about, but it would just be me pointing out the same thing of, oh, he's in a white t-shirt. I think there's one where he's wearing a yellow t-shirt and one where he's wearing a white vest, but it's basically the same sort of image over and over again, so I'll just show them on the screen. But I think this last image really sums it all up. It's from an article that was ranking the best film posters from The Rock's filmography, and it's some kind of like fan art, digital art thing, but it just sums up how similar all of them are. They've taken away the backgrounds obviously, but just looking at the characters that he plays, he's always playing the same type of character and they always addressed exactly the same. Now, say what you want about someone like Johnny Depp or something, but if you took the characters from a lot of his films, placed them against a blank background, and just said to people, like, what film is that guy from, what film is that guy from? Well, Edward Scissorhands and, you know, the guy from Secret Window and the guy from Dark Shadows and Jack Sparrow, yeah, there's quite a lot of similarities between them because a lot of them are like Tim Burton characters, but like you can tell the difference between Jack Sparrow and Edward Scissorhands, whereas with the Rock's characters, he's literally just playing a big beefy muscly guy with a goatee who wears a shirt and usually punches people. Probably the closest one that was any different was his character in Skyscraper, because he was well, he was an amputee, but I wouldn't say he was disabled because he was still able to jump through buildings and take down a criminal organisation. So they started to go to somewhere interesting with it, and then by the end of it he was just the same character he always plays. So what is the point that I'm trying to get at here? Well, the first thing is just that laughing at Hollywood and at these posters is kind of fun anyway. I mean, The Rock probably he might actually be the highest paid actor in the world at the moment. His films make stupid amounts of money. the Fast and Furious series alone, I think each one of them films probably made like $1 billion each, so he's got nothing to worry about. If anything, he should be laughing at me because I don't look like that and I'll never make that much money. But the other thing is that I just wanted to kind of open up a dialogue just about these practices and just kind of point the crosshairs at these movie posters and at these companies that make them and approve them, because over the years these have just become worse and worse. If you look at films or the posters from like the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, I'm not saying that each one of them is a masterpiece or that that's what we should be doing, but they're just so much more interesting, or at least a lot of them are a lot more interesting, because some of them are minimalist, some of them hand painted and this, that and the other. They're a lot more interesting in it. I know it's because they had less resources, so they had to try and work something out there. It's kind of like how a lot of big budget films turn out to be worse than these smaller ones because they don't have these limitations that they have to work around. They just think throwing loads of money at it will solve a problem and will make it good. So yeah, they had to deal with these limitations and try and make something interesting, try and sell their film at a time where there was no viral market and there was no, oh, I'll just go on YouTube and I'll just watch a film and we'll have like 10,000 million ads on TV and stuff like that. Like that just wasn't the case back then. And now everything these days is just the same thing over and over again. It's just a collage of actors. That's basically all it is. I mean, even if you look at some older films that do that, I mean, Star Wars did that with most of them, and again, it was quite interesting. Some of them, like I say, they were hand painted, and they just had more of an interesting composition and colour to them. You look at the ones nowadays, I mean, even if we look at a film like Lord of the Rings, like all 3 films in that series, those films are not just good films, those films are masterpieces. They are genre defining. And they have such a bad movie posters that are so boring, and particularly The Two Towers, which is a great film, and the poster could be quite good. It actually has 2 towers in the background with this huge army. That's all you need, but instead they decide to throw this collage of some of the characters, and Gandalf and Frodo are just floating off into the sky, and it's got Legolas in it for some reason, who is such a nothing character in the series. Oh, it's baffling. And then you've got the Marvel movie posters, which is a whole other video in itself, but that's basically the same thing, where there's just so many characters in these films and they are just splattered across these posters. I mean, if you look at something like Infinity War and Endgame, those films are absolutely great. Like, for a comic book film, those films are amazing. And again, it's just, oh, let's just have 50 characters on the screen. It's like, when I'm looking at these posters, I'm like, who is the main character? What is the focus of this film? Is it the guy at the back? Is it the guy at the front? Who is it? The worst one for me, though, is the Age of Ultron one, which is just, all I can say is just a fucking mess. Let's look at 2 of my favourite films, which are a bit more niche, but are still probably fairly well known. First one is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, which the DVD cover is, again, really generic. It's slightly less generic than most films with the colours and the font and that, but again, it's just like a collage of characters. There's another poster where it's Scott playing the guitar, and that's a much better one. I don't know why they didn't just go with that one. Another one, like I say, is Nightcrawler, which that film's love it so much because it shows you can do so much with so little, and has like characters just watching TV and found footage and stuff he's recorded and whatnot, and that is somehow very entertaining. But all of the posters are just a guy. That's all it is. It's just a guy. He might have a camera. That's about it. As I say, it's just disappointing because a lot of these films are incredible, except for Justice League. Yeah, it's just a shame because, like I say, a lot of these films are really good and they have so much talent involved in them, and this is what they can come up with. And it's been going like this for a while, so I dread to think what movie posters are going to be like in another 10 years, because as we've seen with a lot of these films that come out nowadays and they have like one thing that makes them successful, like if we take like Deadpool, which had the rated R thing, and all these producers are like, oh, this film's going to be rated R now. It's like, no, that works for that film because that character kind of needs the R-rated thing to be that character. That's why that character works so well. But just you know, we saw it with the Batman v Superman extended cut thing. Like, that was R-rated, and that didn't help that film at all. So I can just see somewhere these producers sat in a room thinking, oh well, Avengers Infinity War did well, why did that film do well? Oh, they had 30 characters and they had this movie poster and this marketing and stuff like that, and it's just going to end up being like that. We're going to get to a point where it's going to become even more homogenized than it already is, and that's quite scary. That's saying something at this point. And the other thing is just really confusing as well, because we know as audiences that star power doesn't drive the box office like it used to. You know, you're talking like back 50 years ago, people went to see those actors, and obviously people still do that now, but people are more interested in cinematography and technical things and this, that and the other. So we know it doesn't work. Filmmakers know it doesn't work because they keep putting people in these franchises. And you know, you look at something like the Dark Universe, where it's like, oh, this is this Tom Cruise vehicle, and it flopped big time, and that whole universe is destroyed now. So Tom Cruise is a star, and his name does have some pull, but just putting him in a bad film will not make that film successful, and people will like it. So they know it doesn't work, and yet they still continue to push actors as the main selling point of these films. Great example is the First Class poster, which it's X-Men, it's going to do well regardless. So just having these nice black and white, they're very minimalist, very simple, but having these black and white images of Magneto and Professor X is cool. It's a nice little like reboot, and it's a teaser and all that. And I've said it before millions of times, but like these franchises like the Avengers and Star Wars, and I don't know why they pump so much money into marketing. They could just have black and white text on a piece of paper that just says Star Wars is coming out in 6 months, and that's all that they need. But going back to the X-Men one, so they have this nice minimalist poster of Magneto and Professor X, and it's cool, and it has the date, and that's all you need. And then for some reason they very badly Photoshop James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender and whoever else they did these posters. They Photoshop part of their face on it, and it goes from being a nice poster to just being absolutely atrocious. So anyway, that is my rant on this. Hopefully less films will do it in the future, but as I say, films like the Avengers and stuff like that have made 1.5 billion or whatever, so they'll just continue copying everything these films do, right down to, you know, what kind of sparkling water they serve the actors and stuff like that. So if a film generates that much money, then they'll just think, oh well, that's part of why people like it, so they'll just do the same thing. So anyway, thanks for watching, and see you next time.